Hello and welcome to another unit by unit video. Today we're looking at the iconic Ravager. One of the most iconic units in a Drukhari army. Let's begin.
The Dark Kin.
Hello and welcome to the next unit by unit here on SkaredCast. I'm Skari, your grateful host, and we continue to look at the new Drukhari book, diving into the next unit, which happens to be the faithful and mighty Ravager, the fire support of the Cabals in real space. So, if you haven't watched one of these videos already, first thing I do is I talk about the unit itself, the lore behind it, how it fits into the Drukhari story and society, and then we dive into some of the rules that the unit uses in game. So you can kind of make up your own choice and play your game and your collection. Of course, if you want more in-depth tactical analysis and advice, become a Patreon by checking the link down below and join the growing Patreon denizen community from all around the world, from Australia to Denmark to England to Chile to all over the place. So that's really cool. I'm really excited. Let's get started. Talking about Ravagers today. You know, Ravagers are one of those things that I've used for a very long time. And ever since I started collecting Drukhari. And they're a very iconic heavy support choice in a Drukhari, the Drukhari Codex. Of course, I read everything out of the Drukhari Codex, so make sure you check out your own, go and purchase one either electronically or at your friendly local game store or GW. Okay, Ravagers. The Ravager Gunship is just as arrow swift as its brother craft, the Raider. In place of transport capacity, however, the Ravager mounts 3 devastatingly powerful heavy weapons. Upon the battlefield, it fulfills the role of armored fire support, engaging the heaviest of enemy targets, but comparing the Ravager to a gun tank of the Imperium is like comparing a swift-winged raptor to a lumbering beast of burden. Ravager gunships are so fast and maneuverable that they can ambush an enemy tank and destroy it in a single devastating pass, disappearing again before the enemy knows what hit them. Ravagers can be said to fulfill the role of assassins in the war against real space, though their assigned targets are armored vehicles instead of flesh and blood individuals. Each Ravager crew will have priority target allocated to it that it must take down, and if it fails to do so, it will face dire punishment upon its return to its parent Cabal in the depths of the Dark City. The targeting arrays of the Ravager are outfitted with as much information about their quarry as their Cabal can muster, and each Gravskiff's crew are briefed as to the best way to annihilate the enemy vehicle in question. This ensures that the Ravager's capricious gunners focus on a particular task such as crippling the enemy's prized war engine, bringing an armored column to a shuddering halt, or denying the foe their means of escape. It's perhaps indicative of the wider mindset of the Drukhari that the Ravager, the most ubiquitous of their gunship designs, bears even less in the way of armor plating than the personnel transports of mankind. Speed is prized above all. The Ravager's crew reason that if they are already elsewhere when retribution is sought, their chances of survival are far higher than those who wallow around waiting to be hit. This tactic is frustrating to the officers of the Imperium, where war is waged with a sledgehammer rather than the thrust of the rapier. A Ravager squadron is fully capable of appearing from nowhere, delivering the death blow to a god machine of the Adeptus Mechanicus in a single volley, and disappearing over the horizon before the behemoth is even toppled to the ground. So, Ravagers themselves are gunships, and they they have a frighteningly high amount of weapons. And in the fluff, or the lore, they basically dive in, shoot their target, and they're away before the enemy even knows what hit them. They're tasked to crack open transports or kill enemy fire support tanks, and this is mainly using things like dark light weapons, dark lances, and disintegrator cannons. This sort of role they transfer very well into real space, where on the tabletop you get to use your Ravagers in that sort of same capacity. And as the lore tells you, Ravagers are not exactly the most armored or heavily resilient tanks, not akin to a Predator or a Land Raider that has a lot more wounds, a lot more armor. However, what they do is they make up for it in sheer speed and ability to move and fire on the move, to deep strike, to maneuver, and their weapons that are surprisingly strong for a light vehicle of that kind. So let's look at the Ravager itself. So the Ravager itself is a 7 power level tank, essentially. It just comes with a single Ravager, so the unit is 1 Ravager. That means you can only ever have 3 if you're using the rule of 3 in your games. It's equipped with blade veins and 3 dark lances. Now, points-wise, it's not much more than 100 points with whichever outload you give it. However, I prefer the Disintegrator Cannons. Now, it does come with the Dark Lances stock, but you can make them Disintegrator Cannons, and you can mix and match between Lances and Disintegrators. You can have 1 Lance, 2 Disintegrators, 2 Lances, 1 Disintegrator. I prefer focusing the role of your Ravager in a game, so either take all 3 of one weapon or all 3 of the other weapon. If you ever did want to switch it, that's curious. And if you like mix and matching, let me know down in the comments below. Why is it that you like mixing and matching your weapons on your Ravager? I'm curious to know what you think. So the Dark Lance is the main, iconic Drukhari weapon. It is a 36-inch weapon, heavy 1, strength 8, AP -4, which is huge. Anything that has a 3+ armor save just doesn't get a save, right, at all, which is pretty cool. And it's damage D6, so a good hit can do a lot of damage. Sometimes I have a tendency to roll low, but sometimes you can roll really high and just destroy heavily, lots of wound targets with some good damage hits. They have a special ability, so you change the weapons type from heavy to assault if it's equipped on a vehicle, which means on a Ravager or Raider, for example, the Lance becomes an assault weapon, which means you can move and shoot with no penalty. This is really handy. The Disintegrator Cannon is the next type of weapon that you can have. It is a 36-inch range, assault 3, strength 5 and -3, and 2 damage weapon. So that's 3 shots per Disintegrator Cannon. So a Ravager with 3 Disintegrator Cannons will have 9, strength 5, -3 AP, 2 damage shots. So if a Ravager with 3 Dark Lances hits with all 3 Lances, wounds with all 3 Lances, and your opponent fails 3, say, invulnerable saves, you will do from 3 to 18 wounds worth of damage. If a Ravager with Disintegrator Cannons hits with all 9 shots, wounds with all 9 shots, and your opponent fails all 9 saves, you will do 18 damage. The difference is there that the Disintegrator Cannon has a set amount of damage, from 2 minimum to, for just 2. A Lance has a 1 to 6, which means that I find the Disintegrator Cannon to be a lot more efficient in the long run, even with the lowest strength of 5. You're wounding tanks on 5s normally, but any wound that does get through automatically does 2 damage. If you have a turn where you roll really well, on average and statistically, you will be doing more damage in the average than your Lances will, which is why I like Disintegrator Cannons over the Dark Lance. But that is a topic for another tactics and strategy video. Either or, the Dark Lance is very good at cracking open tanks with -4 AP, and you can crack open Rhinos and Land Raiders and whatever it is you want. with relative ease, while the Disintegrator Cannon is a lot more versatile, can be used against infantry and tanks and heavy targets and light targets, so I find it to be more versatile in a competitive style list. Okay, so that's about the weapons. They also have Blade Veins, which is a melee weapon that's strength 4, so you lose 2 points of strength if you use the Blade Veins. Instead of strength 6, it becomes strength 4. And it's minus 1 AP and 1 damage, so it can do some AP damage in combat with 3 attacks. It is movement that goes down, so first tier is 14 inches of movement, second tier is 10 inches of movement, third tier is 6 inches of movement. Its ballistic skill goes from 3 to a 5+ based on each tier, and its attacks goes from 3 to D3 to 1. So as it gets lower, it's gonna get hard. It's gonna hit things harder. It's not gonna move as fast, and it doesn't do as many attacks in combat. Its weapon skill is always a 4+, strength and toughness of 6, which makes it relatively durable. 10 wounds, so it's on the low end in terms of wounds for vehicles of this sort of caliber. It is leadership 7 and has a 4+ armor save. Not the best armored tank at all, really. Wargear options can replace Dark Lancers, Disintegrators, and mix and match. That's a pretty standard one. And it can take items from the vehicle equipment list. So let's take a quick look at the vehicle equipment list. The first one is Chain Snares. The second one is Grizzly Trophies. The third is a Phantasm grenade launcher. And the fourth is a Shock Prowl. Now, all of these have different specific rules that can be pretty handy and pretty neat. And some of them are relatively situational. So that's really up to you. If you have a few points to spare here or there, you kind of throw on the odd thing here or there. So I'm going to start with the most common, which is the Shock Prowl. And it's a melee weapon. And it's strength of user, so all of a sudden you can use a Shock Prowl with strength 6 on the Ravager instead of strength 1. It's minus 1 to AP. However, the special rule for this weapon is you may only make a single attack with this weapon. So if you have 3 attacks, you can only make 1 attack with the Shock Prowl. If the bearer charges this turn, the weapon has a damage characteristic of D3 instead of 1. So you have 3 attacks. When it's a fully healthy Ravager, you can charge in, and then one of the attacks is at strength 6 and minus 1 AP, but does D3 damage. In a pinch can be kind of handy when you're charging in, try to get those last wounds on a vehicle or a monster or a character. You try to ram him with your Shock Prowl. So it can be handy, keep that in mind, and it's only 1 point. It's very inexpensive. But if you are running like 6 Raiders and 3 Ravagers, it can add up. But if you have the odd point left over, great choice. The other one is the Chain Snares. So the Chain Snares allow the vehicle to reroll hits of 1 for a model with this whenever it attacks with its Blade Veins. So essentially, you allow it to get reroll 1s in close combat. It's not terrible. It's very, very situational. There's not a lot of points. But if you had a couple of Raiders jumping in, say 4 Raiders, or Ravagers, or 3 Ravagers, say, because we're talking about Ravagers, running into close combat, and you had 9 attacks, hitting on 4s, rerolling 1s at strength 4 minus 1 AP, and you could reroll 1s to hit, okay, who knows, could be handy. Maybe not on a Cabal Ravager, maybe on Witch Raiders, things like that, so we'll see. You also have the ability to take a Phantasm grenade launcher. This is one of my favorite. So the Phantasm grenade launcher is an Assault 3 18-inch range weapon that does strength 1 and only does 1 damage. That's it. So it won't wound things very often. But if a unit is hit by a Phantasm grenade launcher, it suffers minus 1 leadership. Can be kind of handy. And you can use the stratagem Torment Grenade. So before you shoot with a Phantasm grenade launcher, you could potentially even use it to potentially do mortal wounds against your target by lowering its leadership with the Phantasm and trying to beat it with a roll, so you do D3 wounds. That can be really handy. So it gives a Ravager an ability to cause mortal wounds. It's not bad, and it's relatively cheap. It's only 18-inch range, so you're going to use it in a pinch, and it might not be the best thing to put on a Ravager, maybe more a Raider. However, the option is there if you want an easy way to get some mortal wounds for a command point or so. The last one is the Grizzly Trophy. Now, the Grizzly Trophy itself is a very unique sort of piece of war gear. So it affects enemy morale. And the way it does this is you roll a d6 for each model, for each time a model flees from a unit within 6 inches of a model with the Grizzly Trophies. So if I'm shooting at, say, a blob of orcs, for example, and they fail their morale test, and they lose 10 more models, then I would roll 10 dice. And for each roll of a 6, an additional model would flee the unit. So, very, very situational. You know, if you have a raiders like stuck in, you might work really well if you do a lot of leadership debuffs and stuff like that, where you force more models to run away, and therefore you could force more models to run away with Grizzly Trophies. So it's a very situational upgrade, and because you have to be so close to the enemy, I don't think you'd see it very often with a Ravager per se. But something to keep in mind if you wanted to, you know, have some sort of a leadership bomb style attack list. Now let's go on to the Ravager's abilities. The first is its Night Shield. A Night Shield confers a 5+ invulnerable save against ranged weapons. So even if it only has a 4-up armor save, it has a 5-up invulnerable save, pretty much all the time against all weapons. This can be very handy against high-powered weapons that do very few amounts of hits, because you have a 1 in 3 chance of it just not hitting the Ravager, which is great. The other one is hovering, so you measure distances from the hull or base. So you can measure all ranges and distances from the hull instead of the base, because it's hovering. So, you know, it's a long tank, you can measure ranges from the tip, you can measure to objectives, you can go up and down. It's really cool for raiders, and we'll talk about that when you're looking at disembarking, things like that. It's all about strategy and knowing how to best use that, especially on multi-level buildings, that sort of thing. It's pretty handy. And last but not least, it will explode if it's reduced to 0 wounds. On a roll of a 6, every unit within 6 inches is D3 mortal wounds. So, kind of, you know, scary when they blow up, because it's a 6-inch bubble automatically. Their faction keywords are Eldari, Drukhari, and Cabal, which means they benefit from Cabal obsessions. Now, there's 4 Cabal obsessions. If you want to know more about Cabals, specifically in their obsessions, I did a huge video for the Patreons on their exclusive content. If you'd like to join the Patreon battalion, check the link down below for some cool stuff. And it is a vehicle that flies, and it has the Ravager keyword. So that is the Ravager in a nutshell. I personally love taking 3 Ravagers. My favorite combo is 3 Ravagers followed around by an Archon with a Venom Blade. Archon Skari himself, the Blade. He hangs around with them and points at things and makes the Ravager shoot those things. And those things usually explode. And I run them with 3 Disintegrator Cannons in each. And I have the reroll ones to hit from the Archon, and I use the Writ of the Living Muse relic from the Cabal of the Black Heart, which allows them to reroll ones to wound, which makes them incredibly efficient when they're targeting even the heavily armored targets such as knights or even other vehicles as well. But I'd love to know what you think. Do you agree with my assessment? Do you disagree with my assessment? Leave a comment down below, and we'll see you on the next unit by unit video here on SkaredCast. I am Skari, your grateful host, signing off until next time. Skari out.